Hello, my name is Elizabeth Smith, and for this project, I'm going to be talking about the Book of Esther. And so, the author of Esther is anonymous. It is dated to be around 100 years after the Babylonian exile, and that's dated to be around 478 to 473 BC. So, a little bit about the theology of the book is, and the theme of the book is it is a culminating of the establishment of the Purim festival, which is also known as the Great Reversal. And so, the Great Reversal is an act of God that allowed the Jews to not become the victims, but become the victors over their enemy. And so, another thing is it is the placement of the canon. It is in the Ketuvim, the book of Esther is, and that is in the writings. And so the book of Esther is about two main characters, and so those two main characters are Esther and Mordecai. Esther is also known as Hadassah, and in the Hebrew it means myrtle tree. And so these two main characters is Esther and Mordecai, and Esther was an orphan, and she was raised by Mordecai. And so these are two Jews who lived in the ancient Persian Empire, the capital of the city in Susa. And so the reason they were here, these Jews were here, it was many of the Jews lived in their own community in Susa because of the Babylonian exile. And so, moving on, the king of Persia was looking to replace his Queen Vashti, and the reason why was because she didn't come before him and obey his command for him, him and his friends and um, his 7 eunuchs, is what they're called, were very merry with wine and ordered her to come before them to look at, and she refused. And so the king said that she was no longer his queen, and he was out to find a new queen. And so this is where Queen Esther comes into the picture. So all the guards go out and they gather all of the young virgins in and unknowingly choose Esther to come with them, without knowing that she was a Jew. And so here she is in the kingdom, and all of these young virgins, they undergo a beautifying process. And so the text talks about different oils and spices and ways they would make themselves look more presentable and beautiful to the king. And so as time goes on, it was finally time for them to be presented to the king, but during that entire process, Mordecai was outside of the palace. He was outside the gates, and he would come there every single day to check on Esther. And so, in that beautifying process, Esther found favor in the sight of the king and then was therefore made queen. And so one day, Mordecai, he was outside of the gates, and he heard some of the officials of the king plotting to kill the king or to harm him. And so he brought it to Esther, and then Esther brought it to the king, and the king was saved. And as the story goes on, God was actually never mentioned in the book of Esther, but we see God's providence and God's hand all throughout the book. And so moving on, what happened was the king was saved. The two people who were out to harm him were hung on the gallows, and Haman, which is the bad guy, if you will, in the story, he was an Agite, which is the descendants of the ancient Canaanites, and he was in the highest position of the kingdom and had a demand that everyone in the kingdom was to bow before him. But Mordecai, being a follower of Christ, refused to kneel before Haman. And so Haman, with fury and rage, had a plot to kill all of the Jews in Susa and the Persian Empire, and there was a law that was made. And so Esther was clearly a Jew, but Haman was not. He was not aware of this fact. And so Esther, with a burdened heart, she went out and planned banquets for the king and Haman to join her. And then his plans were exposed. But even before that, Haman had made a gallows for Mordecai to be hung on. But as the story moves on, we see the Lord's hand in that there is a restless night with the king, and he orders to look over the laws and all of these things that happened in his kingdom, and he sees that Mordecai was never honored for saving his life. And so Haman's plan to have Mordecai killed, to have Mordecai hung, was really destroyed at the hand of the king, and Haman ended up being hung on his own gallows. And so I think that this book is just a beautiful representation of the Lord and of the enemy, and how he has gallows for us to be hung on, but the Lord, he is our protector. He saves us from that harm, and the enemy will end up being hung on his own gallows. The Lord is just clearly working in this book, even though God is not mentioned. He's just very evidently working, and also just for his people, the Jews, he was just protecting them through this. And yes, it's just a wonderful book, and thank you.